even among the very colorful cavalcade of poets of the 20th century, Dylan Thomas stands out for being colorful. He was a remarkable poet, but a very colorful personality as well. Born in Wales in 1914, died very young, died in 1953, basically after a somewhat sickly life, but punctuated by some significant alcoholism. He died in New York City while he was on a reading tour. The career and the poetic output are really pretty special. He had a great musical ear for lyrics, for lyricism. That was helped by his ability to, or his talent for reading in public, for doing public readings, for reading on the radio, and for popularizing the spoken word. And the effect of this on his work was that his work did over time become even more musical in certain ways, and he started to experiment, and you can hear it. You can hear the experimentation with rhythm, with rhyme, with emphasis, all of these things building up, because he had spent so much time in a recording booth, quite frankly, because he had spent so much time listening to the sound of his words as opposed to just in his mind and writing them down on the cold, mute page. The idea of sound is integral to Dylan Thomas's work, and it's part of what makes it so special. Now, by far, honestly, by far, the most popular work that comes from him is a lyric called "Do Not Go Gentle into That Good Night." It is a dramatic work. It is very much in that mode of him listening to the sound, and sometimes the sound carries much more than the words really can. And and this poem itself is extraordinarily famous. It is very heavily anthologized. It is very heavily referenced in popular culture, and you can find it in a remarkable number of places. It makes a very poignant and dramatic place in the movie Interstellar from a few years ago. And if you want something a little bit different from that, he gets a great reading by the comic Rodney Dangerfield in the Dangerfield movie Back to School from the 80s, which is a very silly movie, but has got this very stirring moment in it that is highlighted by this poem. You can find, if you go online, you find a lot of really great readings of this. During COVID, the Welsh actor Michael Sheen, a fellow Welshman, just blew the doors off the place with a reading of this poem that was something that went viral, because when you are in a time of everybody feeling a little bit lost and closed in and silenced in COVID, this was a clarion call for beating against that sense of isolation, that sense of helplessness. You get also great readings you can find online from the fellow Welsh actor Anthony Hopkins. You can find, perhaps most significantly, the reading that Dylan Thomas did himself for the BBC. Although, generally speaking, it's interesting to listen to a poet read their own work aloud to see what they're going to do with it. But it's something that I would say you approach with caution after you have your own sense of how it could be, and maybe sample around a few others. And then you sort of back into, well, okay, what did the poet intend it to sound like? And that's obviously very troubling. But it is an impassioned and stirring work of art that is instantly memorable and will stay with you from the point you first hear it until you are going into that good night itself. So, do not go gentle into that goodnight. It is a villanelle, and a very musical one at that. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in the green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sung and sang the sun in flight, and learned too late they grieved it on its way, do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men near death, who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay, rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Whoa, that's something. On a formal level, we'll start there. This is what is known as a villanelle. You can see the refrain, do not go gentle into that good night, and rage, rage against the dying of the light, lines 1 and 3 of that first triptych. And then after that, those lines alternate as the last line of each stanza, and the ensuing 1, 2, 3, 4 stanzas are all essentially constructed in a very similar way, where they introduce a new group of men that have this different reaction, let's say, to going into that good night, and it always ends with the alternating refrain, rage, rage, or do not go, and that creates a kind of rhythm, that creates a kind of momentum to this poem as it builds and overwhelms the audience, and then at the end you get that four line stanza that is very punctuated, that is very syncopated, and kind of uneven and passionate. Look at those commas. And you, my father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your sad tears, I pray. And then no commas. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. So that alternating fractiousness and the flow of the refrain, the familiarity of the refrain, the retreat into the refrain creates a remarkably conflicted effect. Now, the whole idea of conflict, I think, is baked into this poem. You can focus, and many public readings do focus on this being a kind of command: rage, rage against the dying of the light. Do not go gentle into that good night. And it's a command. But if you look at the poems themselves, or the stanzas themselves, look at the individual groups that get handled in those middle stanzas. Wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning. They do not go gentle into that good night. That is a continuous sentence. They do not go gentle into that good night. It's sometimes hard to see that as a continuation, but it is. It's a kind of enjambment. They had forked no lightning. They do not go gentle into that good night. Why do they not go gentle into that good night? Because they had recognized at the end of their life that their words, for all of their wisdom, had really maybe no effect. They really hadn't been as strong as they wanted to be. And the same thing goes for good men. Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds. Good men, their frail deeds. Well, maybe they didn't have the effect that they wanted. Maybe they aren't as, commanding a moral presence as they thought they might have been. Their frail deeds might have danced in the green bay. How lyrical that is. What exactly it means, I'm not sure. It sounds really pretty. It looks really pretty. That imagery is striking, and it sounds so lilting and lyrical. But what does it mean? It means, practically nothing, which is what that means. These people, these good men, are realizing that their goodness, their morality, their ethical and upstanding behavior, perhaps in the end means nothing. And as a result, they rage against the dying of the light. Maybe at that point, maybe that's a sign of regret. They are raging because they recognize that their lives maybe are meaningless. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight. Again, a very lyrical and poetic and imagistic line. Caught the sun in flight and learned too late. Again, that comma. And learned too late. They grieved it on its way. Exactly what that means, again, I'm not sure, but it sounds really good, and it's another great image. They do not go gentle into that good night. They are also resisting. They are also raging. And you start to wonder, is that the point? No matter what, your life comes to nothing, perhaps. You leave at the end of your life. You leave this earth at the end of your life. And is it a moment of regret? Is it a moment of missed opportunity? And the recognition that you are, in fact, just a passing moment, a blip in the history of this earth. Grave men near death, who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Another great image. But it sings, it has this passion, it has this commitment, this soaring quality, but you're back down to rage against the dying of the light. And then it gets, after all of these vague categories of humanity, after all of these, distant and abstract notions of types of people, it comes down to a real person. And it's so immediate, that second person. We finally have, and this isn't just a declamatory speech being hurled out into the universe. This is a conversation with the poet or the narrator's dying father. And you, my father, there on the sad height. What height is this? We're not sure. Is he ascending to heaven at this point? Is he in the action of dying at this very moment? It's unclear. Curse, bless me now with these sad tears, I pray. Bless me now with your sad tears. Why? What is the narrator asking of his father at this moment? Is the command directed only at him? Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage against the dying of the light. Those two lines get packed one against another again. Those two refrains unite at the end, weaving together everything that has come before it. But is that a command? Is it a sentence? Dad, do not go into that good night. You do not go into that good night. At that point, it's really becoming a command, because maybe the father is passing on, is dying, and it is a natural thing in those moments to want to hold on, to not be left as your parents die in front of you. It's an emotional moment. It's hard. It's brutal. But this poem is so unsettled about its relationship with whether or not the dying of the light is good. Is it inevitable? Can you rage against it? All of those other types of men, the good men, the wise men, the grave men, uh, they are in contrast, perhaps, to the father, who is on a sad height. Perhaps it's this, maybe he is the same as everybody else who recognizes too late that they are dying and their lives aren't as momentous as perhaps they would have wished. It's heartbreaking. It's a stirring call to resist that. And if you've ever had the experience of watching a parent perhaps have a prolonged experience with dying and slowly slipping away, maybe dementia or a long illness where there's just lingering and slowly receding, and you're watching that dying of the light over a long period of time, maybe years. Sometimes all we have is the advice to fight it. Whether you're not going to win, it's a losing fight from the start, but maybe that's all we have. Especially if, we are not the wise and the grave and the good with a legacy of whatever that means. Maybe all we have is those last struggles that we go down fighting.